Thanks everybody for joining me today. We're going to be talking about risk treatment in relation to your information security management system. This is the second part, kind of tags on to the previous webinar that I've done, which covered risk assessment. My name is John Laffey. I'm the Information Security Technical Manager here at PJR. And thanks again for joining me. A few quick notes. All participants have been muted, but please feel free to use the question section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. At the conclusion of the presentation, I will answer as many questions as I can. And typically, I work through these presentations fairly quickly, so usually shouldn't be an issue as far as getting to any and all questions that might be asked. There will also be copies of today's presentation available for download on our website, typically by the end of the day. And again, this webinar will also be available for viewing from our website under the previously recorded webinar section. So quick agenda here. We're going to be looking at the following topics: selecting risk treatment, implementing risk treatment plans, evaluating levels of residual risks, assessing effectiveness of treatment, and then again, I will answer as many questions as we have time for. And just a quick note, this does kind of build on the previous presentation that covered risk assessment. So the assumption for this presentation is that an organization has already gone through the assessment process. They've identified risks. They've identified those which require further treatment. They've prioritized them. So now we get into the point of actually getting some things put into place to get those risks reduced down to an acceptable level. Selecting risk treatment options. So broadly speaking, there are 4 options typically available for treating a risk. The first is avoidance, which simply choose not to take on the risk by avoiding the actions that cause it altogether. Second is mitigation. Take actions that reduce the risk by reducing the likelihood, consequences, or both. The third option would be to transfer the risk. Transfer or share some or all of the risk to a third party. Common example would be insurance of some sort, home insurance. So the risk of incurring a huge financial impact if your roof falls in, it can be mitigated by paying for a home insurance policy. And the last option is acceptance. Choose to take on the risk as it currently stands. And this is commonly chosen if the evaluated level of risk meets the acceptable level defined without treatment, which in plain terms in everyday life, if you're deciding what you want to do, what you want to eat for dinner, maybe one place you like the food a bit more, but you've had a bad experience, you got sick from it, and there's another place that it's not as tasty, but it's always safe. If you're a risky person, maybe you'll choose to go to the place that has the better food, but that you got sick from one time. That would be accepting that risk, right? A little note, though, these 4 options are not mutually exclusive, and typically it's very common to see an identified risk be reduced to an acceptable level, at which point it is accepted. So typically when I audit, when I'm looking at information security related risks, they're not always eradicated, right? And I don't know that they always can be, right? Probably the risks that we all deal with the most are those that are always going to be present in some form or another. The whole idea is just to reduce them to an acceptable level. Selecting risk treatment options. In terms of information security related risks and the requirements of the standard, the primary method of treatment will be the implementation or modification of controls. While the standard requires that you reference the controls in Annex A to ensure that none have been omitted that may be applicable to your ISMS, please remember and feel free to design and implement any controls that aren't already covered in Annex A. The standard states that, and I would encourage it. It's fairly comprehensive as far as all the controls and control objectives that are present in the annex, but by no means would I say, it's absolutely going to cover 100% of every kind of control that you might feel would be beneficial to reduce a given risk that you've identified. The selection of controls needed should take into account the risk acceptance criteria established during the risk assessment phase, as well as legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements. While the risk of not complying with legal, regulatory, and contractual requirements will typically never be acceptable, for other identified risks, it is expected that the cost of implementing and ongoing maintenance of selected controls will be evaluated against the value of the asset or assets they will protect and overall return on investment. So it's just another way of saying that, this isn't done in a bubble. Obviously, there are very real constraints, whether it be resources from a people standpoint, technical expertise standpoint, or financial standpoint. And it's not going to be very beneficial to draft up a risk treatment plan that involves, acquiring, purchasing, or hiring resources that the company can't afford. So always keep that in mind. In addition to financial constraints, the following factors should also be taken into consideration when selecting controls. Time constraints. Example, the proposed control would take an unacceptable amount of time to be implemented. Technical constraints. A proposed control would impact the performance of key systems, making them ineffective for business purposes. Operational constraints. A proposed control would require additional oversight and management that cannot be supported. Environmental constraints. A proposed control would require a new facility to accommodate the space requirements. And legal constraints. An existing regulation requires data of a certain type to be encrypted in a particular manner. So in a case like that, where there is a fairly prescriptive requirement that you're subject to, you certainly would want to make sure any risk treatment option that involves that is going to comply with those requirements. Evaluating residual risks. So after you define your risk treatment plan, you will need to determine the residual risks. This is done through another iteration of the assessment process on the identified risks, this time taking into account the expected effects of the proposed treatment. The level of risk expected to still remain after the treatment has been implemented is referred to as the residual risk. If residual risks exist that do not meet the established acceptance criteria, another iteration of treatment selection may be necessary. So this step in the process is basically, do you believe that the treatment plans that you've put forth are going to effectively treat a given risk to its acceptable level? Because if it's not, then it may very well be that there's going to be a better option out there, or you're not going to be satisfied with the outcome. The risk treatment plan should include the persons responsible for implementation, expected date of completion of the implementation, current status of the implementation, and critically, it must be approved by all identified risk owners, indicating their approval of the plan and acceptance of all expected residual risk. So those first items, basically, it's just to ensure that the treatment plan is being carried out, that it's clear when a given treatment is expected to be put into place, and where it's at right now, on whatever day it may be that this evaluation is going on. The approval of the identified risk owners is key because, again, the idea with all of this is that no one can claim ignorance, right? So the people who've been assigned ownership of these risks, who ideally have the ability to, affect getting things moving, resources gathered, whatever the case may be, in order to treat the risk, that they've signed off and said, okay, I agree with this treatment plan, and I accept the level of expected residual risk that's going to exist after it, but that it's going to take care of what we need it to take care of. Assessing treatment effectiveness. So the method of assessing the effectiveness of your treatment plan is going to depend on the nature of the risk being treated. For example, if an identified risk was an unsecured door to an area with sensitive information and was treated by the installation of a lock or card access system, it would be reasonable to see something along the lines of it being tested and verified to be working as intended. If the risk involve unpatched systems being vulnerable to attack, the treatment evaluation may be a weekly report showing numbers of unpatched systems still in use and would require more ongoing monitoring to determine if the actions being taken are reducing the risk to the required level. So again, the methods of evaluation could vary widely, just as the identified risks and treatment options could as well. So it's going to very much be dependent upon what the specifics of the risk identified and the treatment plan being implemented are. Some other generic methods of evaluating treatment effectiveness may include internal or third-party audits, vulnerability scans, penetration testing, reviewing the number of security incidents that have taken place, etc. But regardless of the nature of evaluation, the critical part is that it is being done and that actions are being taken in the event a treatment option is found to be ineffective. Additionally, the status of the risk treatment plan is required to be discussed during the management review as outlined in the standard. So again, the goal of the standard here is to make sure that this isn't just done and then kind of set aside and forgotten about. It should be something that's being reviewed at least during those management reviews that are required by the standard. But it very well, and in many cases I've seen that it is reviewed on a more regular basis, whether it be weekly or monthly security council meetings. It's up to the organization to decide, but you definitely want to keep an eye on this and make sure that what you thought was going to get these risks reduced to an acceptable level is in fact accomplishing that. All right, and that brings us to the end of this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any questions. If I can get this control panel to display in a sensible way. All right. I'm not seeing anything yet, but we got plenty of time here, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this running and keep my eye on it and see if there's any questions I can try and help you with. Again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I think the next one of these presentations that we do is actually going to be a combined presentation of the assessment and treatment presentations that I did in two parts here. Oh, we got a question here. I would assume, and this is, I can't see who this was from. I do apologize because again, this toolbox is terrible for being able to resize windows. But it looks like the question was, I would assume that you can flow down the risk plan to your subcontractors as long as you have oversight of their processes. In that situation, I guess it would depend on the level of oversight that you have. I think typically there would probably be something contractually agreed upon that's going to specify that you do have the authority to enforce that risk plan to your subcontractors, but it certainly could be done, yes. All right, here's a question from Eric. Is there a form template for documenting risks? So Eric, yes, I can say there certainly is. I know that there's a number of companies out there that do sell what they call toolkits or documentation kits. I've seen some of them, and typically these will basically be a collection of templates, and would certainly include a risk assessment or a risk register type template. But as far as if I can provide or recommend a specific one, I can't, unfortunately, but they're certainly out there. Okay. Beatrice, your question says download risk presentation. I'm assuming this may be wondering where or how you can download the presentation. Again, they're going to be on our website at www.pjr.com. And there's a section called previously recorded webinars where you can actually download a video of this entire presentation that should be available at the end of the day. There's also going to be a section where you can just download the PowerPoint slide deck as well if you'd like to do that. I hope that it answers your question. All right. We have a question here that says, is form documentation required for all risk assessment, or can the PFMEA act as the risk assessment? I'm going to go ahead and apologize ahead of time. I'm not sure what that particular acronym is referring to. If you can help me out with that, I could probably do a better job of trying to give you an answer. Failure mode effect analysis. Okay, Jeff. So I'm not intimately familiar with what all is composed of a failure mode effect analysis, but as long as it meets the requirements of the standard as far as the risk assessment is concerned, and that would be basically documenting what the identified risk is and going ahead and giving it some kind of rating based on the criteria that you've established, it should be sufficient. But I can't say unequivocally because I'm not familiar with those PFMEAs intimately. Oh, here's Jeff again. It has a risk assessment on it. It is generally part of a PPAP submission. Again, I would have to see one to give you any kind of concrete answer on that. So I'm going to hesitate to do so at this point. But if it meets the requirements of the standard, then it should certainly be acceptable. Is there a risk matrix for opportunities? This is a question from Dina. So there can be, Dina. Obviously, it's a different kind of risk. As far as what the standard requires, it's just really concerned with those information security risks, and those would be, in respects to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information assets. So it wouldn't necessarily be required by the standard to document opportunities unless they related to those particular risks. I hope that answers your question, Dina. I see Mark here, just with a comment. referring again to that failure mode effects analysis, saying it can be supplemented with a more detailed failure modes and effects criticality analysis, which tracks with their presentation, in my opinion. I appreciate it. It's certainly something I'll take a look at. It just based on what I've kind of gathered here in the last 5 minutes, I'm thinking this is some kind of documentation that either talks about a specific failure of a service or product or process and the resulting effects. So it certainly does very much sound in line with performing a risk assessment, right? Because you're just talking about, it sounds like in this case, maybe something that did already happen, or perhaps they're used as well for things that maybe have not happened yet. So it certainly sounds like we're talking about the same type things here with that. But thank you, Mark. Jeff here just commenting that the FMEA is a risk assessment for things that can go wrong in the process and gives a contingency plan if the failure does occur. Perfect. It certainly sounds like we're talking about the same things here. This just was a particular document that I wasn't intimately familiar with. Oh, Jeff's also adding it stipulates a risk number. Okay, so there's going to be your risk rating. So yes, if this is something that there's a number of you out there that are already comfortable with or have been doing, it certainly sounds that it would lend itself to the risk assessment requirements of the standard. And Jeff just added, it talks about probability and consequence as far as calculating that risk number. So yes, that certainly sounds like it would be suitable for using it to document your information security related risks. Absolutely. So Carla just asked, will all questions and responses be posted on Perry Johnson website as an addendum to this presentation? I don't believe that these are transcribed, Carla, but again, this entire presentation is being recorded, including the interactions that have taken place here. So at a minimum, you could download the recording and just skip to the end where the question and answer session started, or whatever part you're interested in, and that will all be available. Not a problem, Carla. Glad to help. Stick around here for a few more minutes, and then we'll shut up shop. But again, thank you all for coming, and thanks for the questions. For me, I always look forward to this part the most. A, because I like to try and help folks if I can, but B, as perfectly illustrated today, it's an opportunity for me to learn and be exposed to some other things too. So gets me out of my bubble. Much appreciated. Jeff was just asking about the entire webinar being available. So Jeff, yes, part 1 is already on the website, both the recording and the slide deck. And again, in a few weeks, I believe 2 weeks time, I'm going to be combining both of them and giving the entire presentation together, which is a good thing because I think I'm averaging like 5 minutes only or so as I go through my slide deck. So it'll give us a little bit more meat to chew on. No, Jeff, I don't believe there's any login required to view it. I can't guarantee that, but because I actually haven't downloaded it myself, but I do not believe so. Brittany, again, was asking about part one, asking if it can be downloaded and what's the link. So, Brittany, yes, it is available for download from our website, which is www.pjr.com. Under the previously recorded webinars option at the top. Let me see if I can grab a link. Maybe that'll make it easier for some folks here. All right, so Brittany, where you're going to want to go, or anybody who's interested in downloading the previously recorded webinars at pjr.com. At the top menu bar, there's a training drop-down menu, and there's a upcoming webinars link. This is a bit confusing, but you click upcoming webinars, and on that page, you'll see a link to previously recorded webinars as well as past webinar slides. And that's on the right-hand side of that page in a box labeled webinars/free training. All right, well, thanks again, everybody, for coming. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. If you do have any more questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. You can contact me directly. Right at jlaffey@pjr.com. You can go to our website, www.pjr.com, or you can give us a call at 1-800-800-7910 and just ask to speak to somebody about the information security. We'd be happy to answer any questions we can. Thanks again, and I hope you guys all have a great day.